Welcome to Psych for Psychology, a Nystrom & Associates podcast. Our host, Brett Cushing, is a licensed marriage and family therapist at Nystrom. Each week, he talks about all things mental health and therapy with guests, and you get a chance to dive into specific psychology topics that help promote personal development and wellness. And now, your host, Brett.
Welcome to another edition of Psyched for Psychology. Today, we are going to be embarking upon a little self-disclosure. Yeah, I like that. We need a little bumper music, I think, for that.
Do.
Yeah, that would be that'd be good.
Or like the record scratch that's like.
That would be great. Yeah, that's kind of the intro for this one, right?
I know.
So we're talking about the therapists who've gone through therapy, and what we've learned.
Yep.
We really, in our desire with this podcast, we want to make therapy approachable, normal. We all got issues. My brother, he has a term for us. He calls us skull jockeys. Did you ever hear that? I love that.
You know, that one's a new one. I've heard, what is it, head shrinkers? Or
head shrinkers.
Shrinks.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard that. Never heard of skull jockey before.
I had not. No.
But so we as skull jockeys and mental health hipsters are going to be sharing what we learned as we went through therapy ourselves. And I think really some of the best therapists are those who go through therapy and continually do so on some level.
For sure. And even the term self-disclosure, you know, Brett opened by saying we're going to do a little self-disclosure. So that's actually a term that therapists use to say, you know, the therapist is purposefully sharing something about him or herself to, you know, to provide additional, to help with the therapeutic connection, but also to provide additional information. It's always very intentional. But this is an important topic to me too. It's something that I do sometimes share with clients, and I'm always, of course, very, you know, mindful of the information that I share. But I think it's kind of like if you go to the doctor, odds are that doctor has been to see a doctor before, and I think that for some reason, therapists, it's a little bit more like it's not as much of a no-brainer that a therapist has been to a therapist, right? So one of the things that I tell my clients is I'm not wired any differently than any of you. Why should I expect you to do the work if I'm not doing the work? So that is another reason why I wanted to share some insights on that.
Well, that's inspiring. I like that. I like to share with my clients. The rule I kind of have is I don't want to use my clients for me. You know, like I need to share me with them. But I do find that when I do share about myself, it's with the intention of normalizing again, or providing some sort of education to help them connect with something. So that's really, these are all our desires here, is just to share a little bit what we've gone through and hopefully making therapy an approachable idea for you. Right.
It's always exciting to me too to talk with therapists who have been to therapy, right? Because it's not as, I don't think I could put a statistic to it, but I think it's more commonplace now, I think. But even like 5-10 years ago, it was not often that I came across a therapist who either shared that they had been to therapy or had ever been to therapy.
Right.
Which is, I always find so fascinating. But,
well, I think the other reason that we're excited to share is because I was talking to one of my clients yesterday, and he was saying, I always tell people, you know, my therapist says this and my therapist says that. And I said, I don't know if your wife even likes me anymore, you know, but it's still, it's what's behind that is there's an excitement. That, hey, I'm learning something. This is really cool. And when we learn something, we get excited. We want to share.
That's right.
And so we want to tell you a little bit about our journey, what we learned when we were in therapy.
Yep.
Do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
You actually, when you just said that about your client and the excitement and everything, it made me think of something. So I'll just share first. I think it was a very healing experience for me to have someone believe in me. And so what I was hearing in your example just now was an excitement, you know, my therapist says, but in there is like, this person wants the best for me. This person believes in me. They're not just sitting here like, oh, you poor thing, you know, and it's not sympathy.
No.
It's you're both relating to that person, and you're also thinking of them as already having everything they need and already being strong enough, but it's just that they don't quite see it. So it's this place to hold all of that possibility, right? So when I started going to therapy, my therapist, she didn't let me off the hook because she already knew I could do the things that we were talking about.
I like the way you put that. So she wasn't just going to be throwing positive affirmations for you. You know,
not
Krista,
like a cheerleader.
You're good enough.
Yep.
You're strong enough.
And gosh darn it, people like you.
No, there's this aspect of challenge too. And we do have people in our lives that are supportive. Right. And yet they're just sort of yes people because they know what we want to hear. And what I hear you saying is your therapist really pushed you at the same time.
Right. And one of the ways she would do that, I guess I'm kind of doing a bonus one here too, is she would listen to me so deeply that she was always reminding me of what I had said. So it's not like she was sitting here with an agenda for me. She was just literally reflecting back to me what she heard me say, and then would come back to that later if I was telling her something incongruent. She would, again, without judgment, she would say, okay, so I'm aware you did say that you were hoping to do this. Not in a way to, call me out, but in a way of like, these were your words, and now you're telling me this, so does that fit with what you said before? Again, this is after a lot of therapeutic trust had been built, so it wasn't like I was feeling, judged, but she listened close enough to really like get what I was wanting, what I was after, and even just that as a healing experience. So I guess that was kind of two things. So believing in me and listening to me very deeply, but remembering what I had said.
Well, I also heard a third thing.
Go ahead.
There was no judgment.
Yes.
I like to go to Planet Fitness. Really enjoyed going there.
Judgment-free zone.
The judgment-free zone. And it's really funny. I always laugh.
Yes.
Because they got these signs on the wall that say judgment-free zone. And, the moment I want to judge somebody, I think, oh, no, I can't because the sign says, like putting a sign up does not make it a judgment-free zone.
So true.
We can try to do that. And yet, when you went to see your therapist, that was a judgment-free zone. That's because that can't be experienced by having a sign up.
Nope.
It is experienced in a relationship that you were affirmed.
Yep.
And you were pushed.
Yep.
And there was no judgment.
Right. Exactly.
And for many people listening, it's like, where do I get that? How do I get all of that together?
Yep. Exactly.
Well, that's powerful.
Thank you. Yes.
Super powerful.
No, I'm happy I had a chance to share some of that. So
yeah. And
is anything coming to mind?
Yeah,
for
I think, for me, my therapist, it was very much the same. And I went in judging myself.
Okay.
And I would push back. Like, you can't let me off the hook on anything.
Oh,
here.
So you wanted someone to hold you accountable.
I did.
Absolutely.
I wanted someone to judge me. And my therapist really helped me understand how judging myself was just not effective. How I was, and why was I so resistant to letting go of that judgment?
Right.
Because I felt like I had to judge myself.
Yes.
And
that is a great point.
Yeah, I thought that's the good Christian thing to do,
just
like
judge myself so hard.
Right? Yeah, I'd say I'm a good Christian. I feel guilty all the time, right? So and so how toxic is that, right? It's not even remotely truly Christian at all. But
the joke, right?
Yeah, so I wanted the judgment. It's funny. I wanted it, and yet I didn't at the same time. I didn't want to let myself off the hook, and I didn't want anybody else to let me off the hook. It's like, I'm going to beat myself up until, I didn't know when.
Sure.
When is beating myself up enough?
Okay. So that's fascinating because it sounds like the therapist there was able to pick up on how, if I'm kind of getting this right, able to pick up on your self-judgment and that somehow like point that out to you and say like, hey, look, you're holding yourself to a nearly impossible standard, or kind of how did that?
Yeah, just be able to challenge me without judging me.
Yeah.
And in sort of by challenging me to start looking at my behavior, and maybe the why and what's behind it, and again, without, I never felt judged at all. And she was just incredibly patient.
Nice.
And, it was a nice, authentic relationship, too, because I could tell she'd get frustrated, but I never sensed that she was condemning me at all.
Sure, but she was being authentic, it sounds like.
It was an authentic relationship, too.
Okay. And so, actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because authenticity is something in therapy that, I forget about, right? About why it matters. Any thoughts on, why would it matter for a therapist to be just totally or as authentic as possible with their client, do you think?
Well, you kind of threw me. I don't know. The first thing that comes to mind is I think that's where change happens.
Sure.
With authenticity. Because I guess as I think about this some more, think about our lives. So much of our lives is putting our best foot forward and only letting people see the best side of us. Whether it's in physical interactions or in social media and what we post. And what does that do? That creates a lot of pressure and a lot of anxiety.
So much.
That, okay, I always have to be on guard. I always have to make sure that I'm looking okay. And that's not reality. And it just builds so much stress. So when we have authenticity, it's sort of like, oh, I can let my guard down.
Totally.
I can just be me because you're just being you.
Exactly. Well, I think that's right. And I was trying to think, that's a tricky question to answer. So I was like, okay, well, what was it like for me? Because I would say, too, my therapist is highly authentic. And why was that helpful specifically? I think especially coming in, being newer to therapy back when I started it, here's someone who's highly educated, PhD, she used to be a nurse. And so she had credentials, and you can tell just by talking to her, she's very intelligent. And so, however, she always made sure to normalize and just, again, be like, no, I'm human too. Like, I'm just like you, basically.
Right. Yeah. I think of that movie, What About Bob?
I love that
with Richard
movie.
Dreyfuss. Yeah, he played that so great.
Okay, everybody run and watch What About Bob with Bill Murray.
Bill Murray.
Yeah, Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss.
And Richard Dreyfuss was this psychologist in a suit. I'm not saying there's any psychologist listening. You can wear a suit. But it's just, it was so part of his persona. He's in a suit and he had to make sure he's just perfect, and he's behind this really big desk.
And he portrays it so well of like, I can't show that I'm in any way like you.
Right. Yeah. And what I heard you say is your therapist, somehow you knew this person's exactly like me. And what I heard you say earlier is that's what you like to convey to your clients is that I'm just like you.
And I think it's because I experienced it that I was like, and how helpful it was for me, that I just kind of wrapped it into my approach, because it's like, I guess I just know what that's like to feel that way and to be like, okay, this person, yes, they are, an expert at what they're doing. But does that mean they have everything figured out? Absolutely not. Does that mean they have everything all together all the time? Nope.
Yeah. Right.
and are they above getting help? Right. Absolutely not. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think for myself too, what my therapist did that I find I do a lot, and ethically this is what we're called to do as therapists, is to help people see the consequences of their decisions. I think that's how it's stated in our code of ethics. But what I like to think of it as is my therapist helped me see my blind spots.
Okay.
And now think about that. I don't always like that. If I'm driving, for instance, I try to be, always cognizant of people around me. I use all my mirrors. I am an enthusiastic driver, which is a euphemism for I speed a lot.
I love that. I'm going to start using that. I'm just enthusiastic.
I'm a very enthusiastic.
Officer.
Now, nonetheless, my wife will tell me, there's a car over there.
Okay, sure. She's got your...
I always get a little bit irritated because, I know,
Let me do
and
it.
sometimes I don't know, but I don't even want to admit that I know. So sometimes pointing out a blind spot, it can be irritating. We don't want to know. And
we don't.
Yet I know my wife would do it because she doesn't want me to get hurt, doesn't want somebody else to get hurt. Yep. She doesn't want to get hurt.
Right.
But I knew that always intuitively with my therapist, she's going to help me kind of gently look at a blind spot. And it's kind of like those mirrors. Like if you go try and close and they got those mirrors and it's not just a straight on shot. You get like those mirrors on the side and you see every aspect of yourself. You're like, no, just give me the straight on. You know, I don't need all these other angles.
I know.
And I when I see that and when I'm shopping, it's kind of like, oh no, I don't want to look at that. But somehow when I was in therapy, my therapist could help me see blind spots and it wasn't threatening for me.
Which, again, is so, it's like, what is that? Like, how does that happen, right? And it's got to be back to what we were talking about with the not feeling judged. Because some people in my life, if they call me out or tell me about a blind spot, I'm kind of like, mind your business.
Right.
You know? But if it's my therapist, it's kind of like, okay. Like, it's someone who is not too close to the situation, who I know cares about me, who isn't trying to control me in any way. Sometimes friends or family have their own motives by pointing something out, like, you need to change this because I don't like it, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But this is just like purely for, you know, like awareness, I think. So no, I love that. Blind spots. Yep. Another one that I'm going to try not to get too far into the weeds with Freudian psychodynamic talk, but I know, right? Is just, I think one of the biggest things that's helped me is the concept of projection. So one of the things my therapist, I remember her telling me early on, and I didn't really believe her at the time, but she said, there will come a point if we work together, if we keep working together, where you will get angry at me. And I was like, what? You know, because I'm like, there's no way, you know, I'm kind of thinking, okay, whatever. But she said, no, I really want you to hear me because when that happens, I want you to tell me. You have to tell me. And I, again, just kind of took it with a grain of salt. But, you know, lo and behold, the day arrived where she said something that made me very angry. And I felt, and all this stuff came up that was like, I'm feeling judged. I'm feeling put down. And I, because she had, you know, given me the heads up and oriented me, I told her and we worked through it. Now, the reason that was so powerful for me is because I had not had the experience in my life, very often at least, of having a feeling of anger and frustration towards someone and having them be able to hear it and having them be able to say, thank you so much for telling me. Now let's talk about what's going on.
Right, so you had an opportunity to learn hands-on how do I deal with conflict in a relationship.
Right, and because she also didn't take it personally. She was ready. She knew it would happen at some point, and I'm sure she's dealt with it. And I've dealt with it too now that I'm a therapist. You know, this was before I was even a therapist, right? So I'm thinking, I wasn't even thinking in terms of like that concept is kind of called projection. Like there's something coming up for me and I project it onto the therapist.
You're the problem.
Right. Like you're judging me, blah, blah, blah. And so, so we would work it through, and it's happened multiple times, but it's helped me get to this deeper level of like, I think that's part of how you learn how to speak up for yourself, how to, it's an intimacy thing, I think. Like you can't really have emotional intimacy with someone if you never go there. If you never say to them, hey, you really disappointed me, or hey, I wanted you to show up for me and you didn't, you know, or whatever it is.
So in other words,
go ahead.
What I hear you saying is you learned how to be assertive.
I did.
Because with the projection, we get aggressive and I try to control you. Or we can be passive, and that's when I allow you to control me. But what I heard you say is I learned how to be assertive, and I was just going to control me and focus on my anger and what was going on inside of me. Where do we learn that growing up? And
well, usually we don't. At least, again, you know, and I'm always telling people I am not one to blame parents. I'm not one to shame parents. I think we're all doing our best. I think what I experienced growing up was I just dealt with it myself. I didn't say it to anyone. I didn't explain it to anyone. I just kind of figured like I'll just, if I have something wrong or an emotion or something that's troubling me, I'll just find my own way because I don't know if the adults are going to be able to. That was my belief, right? It's not like the adults were saying, don't tell me how you feel. It was more like my perception was there's too much going on. My parents are overwhelmed. I can't bring this to them, so I won't.
I love that because I think what I'm hearing from you flies in the face of the narrative I hear too often in our culture, the indictment against therapy is that therapists, all they do is just tell you, like you're okay, and all they do is affirm you, and it just becomes a place to enable your dysfunction to continue.
I'm so glad you said that.
And like what you just talked about is what I experienced too, is that therapy is about change. And if someone's going to get pissed off at their therapist, I might even use that. I like that because if someone's not upset with me along the way, we can't work through this inevitable change that has to happen. And I think for me, with my therapist, she taught me a term that I had never heard that I still use a lot today. And I used to sort of define myself and describe myself in all these negative terms, judgmental terms. Yeah. And so I would talk about my behaviors in really negative mannerisms. And she would say, Brett, that was your survival skill that you learned growing up.
Wow.
And she totally changed my view of myself.
Yes.
Because I think in that term I was able to hear some validation and some need for change at the same time. Like, hey, this was a survival skill for you. My survival skill growing up was I suppress and deny myself, and I defer to other people.
Yes.
And she said that was your survival skill.
Yep.
And you've been doing that, all these years.
There you go.
And you don't know any better because that's your only tool in your toolbox.
Exactly.
And that helped me sort of jettison quickly out of this judgmental zone that
why do I always do this?
I had to keep myself in there. And for some reason, that was so helpful. It challenged me. Like, no, you're right. This was. And it makes sense. And this doesn't work. And so I had to, she really taught me to become aware of my somatic awareness. Just like, all right, so what's going on
with you
physiologically, and just pay attention to that, because I had no idea. I knew how everybody else felt. I knew everybody else, I knew better than they did.
Exactly.
And yet I didn't have a clue what I was feeling.
Wow.
And it was so helpful for me.
That is so helpful. And what I heard in there too is calling it a survival skill helps. I would think would help you have compassion for that little kid, the little Brett, right? That was working so hard and was like, I have to do this. This is because kids are brilliant. I mean, they will figure out a way to get their needs met. And for a lot of kids, it's defer to others, suppress my own feelings, right? Don't speak up. Don't say anything. Don't even be aware, actually. Be aware of what everyone else needs, right?
Right.
So again, just that little Brett was just working so hard. And actually, it did work for, I'm using air quotes, it worked for a time. And so like your therapist was pointing out, no longer is it working for you.
And because this was so revolutionary in my life, I get excited to be able to use self-disclosure in therapy.
There you go. Yes.
And I got this whole thing I've devised in all my work called Crazy Town. And
I already love it.
Yeah,
Can we name the podcast Crazy Town?
Crazy Town, that'd be fun. I love Crazy Town. I do want to write a book on it.
Nice.
And it's really about how I was so attuned to how everybody else felt, and yet I didn't know what I felt. And I also believe my responsibility was to fix and to manage and control how you were going to feel, how you were going to react. And I didn't realize I put so much pressure on myself. And so when I'm living over there, I'm in Crazy Town.
That is so profound.
I tell my clients, my self-disclosure, as I say, I used to be the mayor of Crazy Town. And I'm no longer the mayor, and I find myself going back to visit sometimes. I was
going to say, I love that. I love that so much. Because, again, even in the way that you model that for your clients is something that that helped you from your therapy. It's
I'm
incredible.
excited. I mean, maybe I'll just start saying, well, my therapist told me.
Well, actually, I want to mention that really quick, maybe as we're wrapping up here, because I've had, I think, a couple of people, most people are encouraged when I share that I've had therapy myself. Every so often I'll get someone who will kind of be like, uh-oh. why do you shouldn't you already have the answers? Right.
Yeah. So like your credibility is in question now.
Yeah. And I'm always glad to hear their honest response because I want to talk about that. Right. Mm-hmm. And validate and say, yeah, I could see why that would seem maybe strange, and usually as we talk it through more, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I mean, I didn't just come out of the womb like knowing all the answers, right? Like it's my lived experience is what, I mean, yeah, I've read books, but my lived experience is what I really, really have come back to as being, why I'm able to help because I've been through so much too.
Well, and I think it normalizes for the client who is sort of calling that into question in their own mind. It really betrays that what their mentality is that
there you go.
I need to become like you where I don't have problems and it's not okay to have problems. And that reminds me of one of my best professors in grad school taught, Sandra Wilson taught a class, Counseling Dysfunctional Families. And she said, we all know what dysfunctional families are, but can we define it?
Sure.
And we can look at that family and say, oh, they're so dysfunctional. But what does it mean? And she said it really hinges on truth. How we deal with truth.
Oh, I love that so much.
She was so good. And she said the dysfunctional family, person, company will look at truth, especially when it's hard, embarrassing, there's shame, etc. And truth is the enemy. And so we work on blame and distancing ourselves from truth. And we work on appearance management. Everything's fine here. Whereas the healthier person, family, company, will look at truth, especially when it's hard, it's difficult, it's embarrassing, and there's shame, and they still see truth as the friend. And so they embrace that truth. They don't focus on blame. They focus on individual responsibility. And so instead of working on appearance management, everything's okay, we work on problem solving.
Wow.
And, I think, for the client that might come in and say, oh, my therapist, has problems. Yeah, that's the truth.
Yep.
And we're going to embrace the truth because that's where real freedom, that's where real change happens. And I think that kind of captures what both of us experienced in therapy is that there might have been things we didn't want to look at, blind spots.
Yep.
We had somebody who was really devoted to us, genuinely cared, didn't judge us, but helped us look at those blind spots and embrace truth where we found change and freedom.
Yep. I got to say, we might have to do another episode on this topic at some point because as we're talking, it's like it's reminding me of more things I've gotten out of therapy. So
I would love to hear those things.
Good.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. This is fun to talk about.
Stay tuned, everybody. And thanks for joining us today on Psyched for Psychology.
Thank you as always for listening, and please be sure to leave us a review. While this podcast can't be a replacement for therapy, we hope you enjoyed our discussion today and join us again next time. Nystrom & Associates is always available to those who are struggling. If you find yourself in need of support and help, please check us out at nystromcounseling.com.